My son's teacher called me after school, and I could hear the hesitation in her voice before she even got to the point, that particular caution teachers use when they're about to tell you something they know is going to hurt. She said Noah had said something in class that day, something she felt I needed to know about right away. Then she told me, "Your son told everyone you're not his real mother." I stood in my kitchen holding the phone so tightly my knuckles ached, and for a moment I couldn't find any words at all. Noah is 9. Quiet, thoughtful, the kind of child who chooses his words carefully because he's always been more observant than kids his age tend to be, more attuned to the feelings of the people around him. I've raised him since he was a baby, since before he could walk or talk or remember anything at all, and in 9 years he had never said anything like this to me. Not once, not even in the ordinary moments of frustration every child has with a parent. I thanked the teacher for calling, told her I'd talk to him, and hung up feeling like the floor had shifted slightly beneath me. When Noah got home that afternoon, I tried to bring it up gently, sitting with him at the kitchen table while he worked on his homework, asking him carefully how his day had gone, if anything interesting happened at school. He shrugged, kept his eyes on his worksheet, said it was fine, nothing much happened. I didn't push further that night. I told myself maybe it was a misunderstanding, some comment taken out of context, blown up into something bigger than it actually was. But the next day, it happened again. His teacher called a second time, her voice more concerned now, and told me Noah had repeated it in class, this time more clearly, more deliberately. "She's not really my mom," he'd told his classmates in the same soft, matter-of-fact voice he used to talk about anything else, like it was simply a fact of his world he was stating out loud. The other teachers had started to notice too, had started exchanging looks in the hallway, and I could feel, even over the phone, the concern gathering around my son and around me like weather. I felt something close to panic settle into my chest that evening, driving home from my shift at the hospital, running through every possibility in my mind. Had someone said something to him, some other child repeating gossip they'd overheard from a parent, some careless comment that had planted a seed of doubt in my son's mind about where he belonged, about who I was to him? I've been a nurse for over a decade, and I know how to stay calm in emergencies, how to keep my voice steady when everything around me is chaos. But nothing had prepared me for the particular terror of feeling like my own child might be slipping away from an understanding of our family that I thought had always been solid between us. Noah wouldn't talk about it. Every time I tried to bring it up gently, he'd go quiet, his shoulders curling inward, his eyes finding anything else in the room to look at besides me. I didn't want to push too hard, didn't want to make him feel cornered or ashamed of whatever was going on in his head, but I also couldn't shake the fear that someone, somewhere, had said something to turn my son against me. Had planted a doubt I didn't know how to undo. A few days into this, while doing laundry, I went into his room to gather clothes off the floor and my eyes landed on a stack of papers on his desk, drawings he'd been working on for what looked like a school project. I wasn't trying to snoop, I told myself, just gathering his things the way I did most evenings, but one drawing caught my eye before I could look away, and once I'd seen it, I couldn't unsee it. It showed Noah, drawn the way 9-year-olds draw themselves, a small figure with a wide smile, holding hands with a woman who had wings. Not fairy wings exactly, more like the soft, feathered wings children draw when they're trying to represent something they don't quite have words for yet, something they understand only through the stories adults have told them. Beneath the drawing, in his careful, still developing handwriting, he'd written, "My first mom." I sat down on the edge of his bed with that drawing in my hands and felt something in my chest crack open slowly, painfully, understanding arriving in pieces. Noah's biological mother had died when he was only a few months old, an illness that took her far too quickly, far too young, and I had come into his life shortly after, first as someone who loved his father and helped care for him during those earliest, hardest months. And then, after his father and I married, as the only mother he had ever really known in any way he could consciously remember. I had officially adopted him a couple of years later, made it legal, made it permanent, made it feel, at least to me, completely and unquestionably real. I had always been honest with Noah about his birth mother. We kept a photograph of her in his room, told him about her when he asked, let him know from as early an age as he could understand that she had loved him deeply and that her death had nothing to do with him. Had nothing to do with whether he was loved enough or wanted enough in this world. I thought I had handled it well, had given him an honest, gentle understanding of where he came from. I hadn't realized, until I sat there with that drawing in my hands, how much he might still be quietly working through on his own, in the private spaces of his 9-year-old mind, spaces I didn't always have access to. That evening, after his bath, I sat on the edge of his bed and told him gently that I'd seen his drawing, that I wasn't angry, that I just wanted to understand what he'd been feeling. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes searching my face like he was trying to figure out if it was safe to say what was actually on his mind. And then, finally, the words came out of him in a rush. Like they'd been building pressure behind some internal dam for days. You're my forever mom, he said, his voice cracking slightly. But I didn't want people to forget the mom who gave me life. I felt tears come to my eyes immediately, and I pulled him into my arms, holding him while he continued, his words tumbling out now that the first ones had broken free. He told me that in school they'd been doing a unit on family trees, drawing branches and writing in the names of parents and grandparents, and when it had come time to talk about his family, he'd found himself wanting to explain that he had two moms. Not because he was confused about who was raising him. Not because he doubted my place in his life, but because he didn't want his first mother, the one he never got the chance to know, to simply disappear from the story of who he was. He said the other kids didn't understand what he meant when he tried to explain it, and so he kept saying it more simply, more directly, not really my mom, meaning it as a factual statement about biology, never meaning it as a rejection of me. Of the life we'd built together. Of every bedtime story and school pickup and skin knee I'd tended to over 9 years of being exactly the mother he needed. I held him for a long time that night, feeling the relief of understanding wash over the fear I'd been carrying for days, but underneath that relief was something else too, a tenderness for the complexity my son had been quietly carrying inside him. A 9-year-old trying to hold space in his heart for two mothers. One he had never gotten to know and one who had never left his side, and not knowing quite how to explain that duality to a room full of classmates who'd never had to think about family in anything but the simplest terms. We talked for a long time that night about his first mom, about the photographs we kept of her, about how loving her memory didn't take anything away from what he and I had built together. How a child's heart is big enough to hold more love than people sometimes think possible. How there was no contradiction in missing someone he'd never really known while also being completely, fully mine. I told him he never needed to choose, that both truths could live inside him at the same time, that his first mother's love had given him life and mine had simply continued the work of loving him every single day since. A few weeks later, the school held an event where students were invited to share something about their families, a small presentation in front of the class as a kind of follow-up to the family tree unit. I sat in the back of that classroom with the other parents, my heart pounding with a nervousness that had nothing to do with public speaking and everything to do with hoping my son felt secure enough now to say whatever he needed to say. Noah walked to the front of the room when it was his turn, small and steady, and he looked out at his classmates for a moment before he spoke. I have two moms, he said, his voice clear and unhurried in a way that surprised me, like he'd been rehearsing the words in his mind until they finally fit. One gave me life. The other taught me how to live it. I don't think I breathed for several seconds after he said it. I sat there in that small chair meant for children, surrounded by other parents, and felt tears slide down my face without any way of stopping them, my hand pressed against my mouth to keep from making a sound. Every fear I'd carried over the past weeks, every sleepless night wondering if I'd somehow lost my place in my son's heart, dissolved completely in that single sentence, replaced by a pride so large I could barely contain it inside my chest. Afterward, walking to the car together, Noah asked if I was okay, since he'd noticed the tears, and I told him I had never been more okay in my entire life. That what he'd said in front of his class was one of the most beautiful things I had ever heard. And that I hoped he always felt free to talk about both of his mothers exactly like that, with all the love and complexity that truth actually contained. Driving home, I thought about how close I had come to letting fear and misunderstanding create distance between us, how easily a child's honest, complicated grief can be misread as rejection if you don't take the time to actually listen to what's underneath the words. I thought about the drawing still sitting on his desk, the woman with wings, my first mom, and how that image had taught me something I don't think I fully understood before becoming his mother, that love isn't diminished by sharing space with another love. That a child can hold gratitude for the woman who gave him life and devotion for the woman who stayed, without ever having to choose between them. Love isn't measured by biology. It's measured by the people who stay. I think about that every time I look at Noah now, every time he calls me mom in that easy, unthinking way children do when they feel completely secure in who loves them. What makes someone a real parent to you?